Today we look at the Black Swan 22 communication exercise. Can amateur radio provide viable communication service for emergency managers, planners, and responders? What happens when different organizations all need different things at the same time, but still need to be able to work with one another? We'll find out on today's Radio KD8TTE. Stick around.
Black Swan, Black Swan.
We talk a lot here about amateur radio being there when the usual means of communication is not available. It's a powerful service, and good communication is very important in a disaster or an emergency. It can prevent a disaster from compounding. But why amateur radio? Isn't this a job for professionals? Well, it's not quite that simple. Needs arise and they need to be met. The amateur radio service exists in part to ensure that the public can communicate, particularly having an option for emergency communication. Professional responders and managers at agencies include amateur radio into their response plans. But it's not just a matter of anyone with an FCC radio license being called into service. Communication needs are becoming increasingly sophisticated and well-defined. Amateur radio operators who want to be part of a service need to train to be sure that they can perform the tasks needed and that they are known and qualified by the agencies they're looking to help. The Black Swan communication exercise series was created with the idea of addressing modern needs. That means not just voice for people, but also data for computer systems that drive so much of what we do today. We need to have integration. Local responders need to be able to work with supporting emergency managers and also with non-government organizations. And all of this has to be agency-driven. In a lot of cases, amateur radio operators will train locally with their own teams, typically as part of some kind of a public event if they're working with ARIES. And that is fine just as far as it goes. It does help people to be able to work with one another and to make use of the equipment. However, it is critical that these installations are also able to connect to a larger whole. Anytime we're talking about a large-scale event, it's going to grow. Emergencies may start local and end local, but that doesn't mean that they stay local. Sometimes there's a need to work with the outside world to get support. The concept of operation for Black Swan is to deal with rare, high-impact events. They disrupt communication and also require that there are some other things that are getting done. In that scenario, we're talking about interagency response. We have agencies working with non-government organizations, and they're going to need to draw upon their auxiliary forces. We want for Black Swan to have realistic exercise play and to focus on critical tasks needed by those auxiliaries who are providing communication circuits. The impact on communication infrastructure from rare but foreseeable events is well documented. Reports are often presented in terms of outage in the area of interest. We saw that in the first days of Hurricane Ian in Florida, with 12% of cell towers being out of service. Yet that doesn't really tell the whole story, because in some counties it was well over 70% of the cell towers being out of service. Where only 30% of the infrastructure hasn't been damaged, you can be sure that it's overwhelmed. So usability there is probably closer to 0% in the most heavily affected areas. The Black Swan exercises enumerate objectives, measure performance, report results, and then prioritize follow-up training. In 2020, the exercise included working with non-government organizations. There were big problems with players not activating per their standard procedures, and there were significant problems with many of the agency interfaces. The hams generally were able to work with one another, but following instructions from an agency and organizing to function as needed was a big problem in most, but not all areas. For 2021, we organized the exercise differently, not relying on the NGO to activate volunteers and to fill in the needs. That left us focus on the core functions of radio communication. We focused local training on message relay, and results were evident. The system was able to send, receive, and deliver messages quite well. Origination was still a major problem, however. Somewhere in the middle was how well we could organize stations to perform needed functions. And that brings us to Black Swan 22. It was designed to build on the previous year's successes. We wanted to keep the task list relatively small. We wanted to train and practice in the run-up to the Black Swan exercise. The twist this year would be to manage circuits for several in-state sites and then add to that several sites that were out of state and would not be reachable directly in the same HF net. So this year we continued with our weekly training program. That's Monday's video on YouTube, Tuesday's task and discussion on the QTC mailing list, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday on-air operations. We also had projects, the QSP Weekly Radio Newsletter and the Weather Alert Project, and events as they came up, like the DoD COMEX 22-2 that we covered on this channel. This year's objectives were a lot like last year's. Last year's group did well with most of this, so the experience would let us focus on bringing those skills to a large number of operators. We'd also focus our training on origination, where we were weak last year. We settled on 6 sites for the exercise in 4 states, supported by different FEMA regions and shares nets. This would give us opportunity to test the long-haul circuits with live nets and the ability to fall back to WinLink relay if needed. Each of the states made up what we called a venue. Ohio had the Central Ohio Poison Center and Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security. Oklahoma had the Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security and City of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma Office of Emergency Management. We also had Hennepin County, Minnesota, and Alachua County, Florida in play. In Ohio, we had not only the sites in play, but we had an observer based at Camp Perry up in the north, 2 Auxcom stations in the east and southeast, control cell in central Ohio, and independent Black Swan net operators expected to join the operation in progress. We then established a schedule for operation. The exercise was to start at the beginning of the 28th of September, Zulu time, meaning 8 p.m. on the 27th in Ohio. We then started holding scheduled nets twice daily, with options for stations to meet and exchange messages anytime needed. And it wouldn't be a Black Swan exercise if we didn't have some last-minute change. Hurricane Ian was threatening Florida just as we were getting ready to start. So the day before the exercise started, we had to take the shares HF nets out of play. We moved all of the activity to the Black Swan HF net. We had the WinLink relay already built into the plan, and we'd be able to fall back to that for long distance. Alachua County, Florida, the Gainesville area also began making real-world preparations to deal with Ian should it blow that way. The rhythm of play worked well, giving us an opportunity to release instructions and not to rush players to make immediate responses. While we did care about timeliness, we didn't set aggressive constraints on response times, especially in the beginning. The regular rhythm gave players a chance to get acclimated to the activity, to get an understanding of how to play, and to ask any questions needed. Among our earliest messages were indications of a developing situation and a call for activation of the Black Swan net. Early on, we asked for information that could be gathered at the local stations and to report back. We started with internet ping times for well-known sites as if to gather information on internet health. 12 hours later, we had our next net. As responses were flowing back about internet service, we released our next message asking for information about physical infrastructure. On the net following, we started to see some information about that infrastructure. We compiled all of the information that was coming in for the next net, providing information for the common operating picture for all players. We found a few surprises, including some real-world outages of power and broadcast media in parts of Ohio. We also got some real-world, procedure word no play, information from Alachua County, Florida, and issued a directive to other players not to originate messages to Florida. And we went on like this during the build-up period of the first several days. We also requested HF noise floor information broken down per band. We requested signal reports for the WWV and CHU stations. We requested signal reports for the WRMI shortwave stations. That station is based in Okeechobee, Florida, which would be close to where Hurricane Ian was expected to land. This gave us a good working picture for the situation at each of the stations. Unfortunately, as we started to get our WRMI reports in, we were able to see transmitters starting to go off air, no doubt because of Ian. After a few days of operating, we were then able to change things up with some injects. We provided information to players that would direct them to go talk to a doctor. The way that would work is we gave them a URL in a radio message. They would click on the URL and they would go to a video that was not published, and it would be a doctor talking to them just as if they were there as a radio operator.
We have an 18-year-old man, snake bite versus left hand, 2 punctures over 5th metacarpal with 10/10 pain, 14 centimeter ecchymosis, swelling and erythema above elbow, no coagulopathy yet. He's also intoxicated. Snake unidentified, but we have copperheads around here. Do you advise anti-venom?
We also had a medical rescue scene where a similar situation would happen with a URL leading to a video where you'd be talking to a
Frank is an adult male. He was caught in the fallen debris. His legs crushed and holding him down. He's pinned. We're unable to see below that left knee.
We changed up the schedule a bit for weekend play and introduced a VHF circuit for working in the Central Ohio area, covering Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security, the Central Ohio Poison Center, and the SimCell. Not only did we now have medical information flowing via VHF and HF, but we continued to handle reports back on WRMI, WWV, and CHU reception, noise floor reports, and other information that we asked for without particular urgency. To keep things extra interesting, we also got a DoD message we didn't expect. It was coming in as part of the Mars coordinated effort with the ARRL SET, which was happening at the same time. And even with all of this going on, we still didn't reach that Black Swan level of zaniness, because in case Mother Nature hadn't done enough for us already, we also got an R2 level radio blackout. Fortunately, we covered radio blackout on this channel in the weeks before the exercise and had some strategies to work through such difficulty. Plus, we had our ongoing projects to manage, including QSP, the radio newsletter, and release the weekly issue we did. It's fair to ask how we performed. The big win this year was in origination. While we had some players who did not originate radio messages, but instead did simple replies to WinLink, the messages still did get originated so they could be relayed on other circuits by the operator receiving the reply. Our usual participants did a great job with relay. We had a few new players who had just joined us in the training and they still had some trouble. But it was a nice performance. Everything was done with ease or with only some difficulty. And so for the improvement plan. We've identified how to improve our performance for next year. In some cases, it's just a matter of practice, helping the newer operators to get caught up to where the more experienced operators are. In other cases, we needed to look afresh at how we were arranging paths in the nets and to update our plans accordingly. In another case, we need to look at options for the software that we're using for how we can originate messages to deal with some minor issues there or look for bug fixes. So join our training program. You can start by subscribing to this channel if you haven't done so already, like the video if you found it helpful, and share it with others. Also, be sure to follow us on the QTC mailing list. There's a link for that below. Check the after action report and improvement plan. There's a link for that as well in the description. That's going to show you all of the messages we've presented here and many others in Appendix D. If you're in or near Ohio, you can engage with us on the Black Swan Net for ongoing training and improvement. If you're not able to make the distance to the Ohio area on HF, you are still welcome to coordinate your training with us. Reach out to me and we'll be happy to get you connected. A big thanks to all of our players this year, our planners, controllers, evaluators. Great job on this, the 6th annual Black Swan COMEX. Until next time, this is Radio KD8TTE, out.